have to create some kind of a protocol by which you inform the other species, like, hey, like you're not alone, and you got to do it gently, and you got to do it through certain processes, and you got to make sure that whatever's coming in is not just whatever, but that there are certain understandings of universal ethics that will allow us to play in these spaces, which I believe is what these very gentle attempts to like religious texts and things like this, to like, hey, you might want to follow these rules. You might want to teach yourself how to want to follow these rules. I am Allah, I am Yahweh
Abba, no one may testify. Hello, friends. So I wanted to start this podcast with a short introduction. I have a conversation that follows with Danny Goler, who is responsible for the DMT laser simulation code experiment you may have seen. And you can find out more about Danny at codeofreality.com, or his channel is Dan Go Thoughts on YouTube, DANGO Thoughts. So this was one of the most enriching and lively conversations that I've ever had. He's an incredible human. He's one of the most authentic people I think that I've ever met, and a brilliant mind, and he's doing some incredibly profound research. So without further ado, let's dive in. Thanks so much for doing this, brother.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure.
Great to have you.
Thank you. I love your mic.
Thanks. Yeah, it's colorful.
Nice.
But it lets you know it's working, so. Yeah, man. Well, DMT Danny, is it okay if I call you that? It seems like the internet...
The what?
The internet has named you.
It seems that way. The first time I ever heard it was Zoltan told me that it's what I'm called. Yeah, it was very funny.
Yeah. And I've watched a couple podcasts. I saw you on Danny Jones, probably... I forget what's the first one I saw you on, but it was prior to Danny Jones. But that one you went into great detail on this whole journey. But I had a couple questions about it. So how long ago was it when you first started this quest? I know that you didn't even really know what you were looking for, but it seemed like you knew you were looking for something. So how long ago, and then what was it that actually spurned this journey?
So I think it depends on what how we determine how the story starts, because the story is, our lives is the story, right? But I think if I have to put a marker on a starting point, it would probably be when I first had an experience that I'm talking about with the frog guy, right? When this being appeared in my room that was just so realistic as it was like a person. I think that was one of the first points where the experience on DMT became so realistic to me, after doing it many, many times before, of course, that I could no longer entertain the idea that it's somehow just mind-made, or what we call mind-made, right? In other words, it became clear to me that it has to have a reality of its own. And then the question became very simple, which is there a way to determine this? Is there a way to ask a question, run an experiment, do anything that would essentially tease out this difference? And I would say that was the guiding principle and question. And I tried to go about it in numerous different ways. The first one was obviously to ask the beings in the space, well,
sure,
are you guys how do we do this and all of that? And there was never really forthcoming answers. It was more like, oh, look at this. When we jump into your body and you fold your hands, the room folds in half. I'm like,
right,
cool, but what about the other thing? So then I basically tried to go about it in, I tried to record myself. I had a bunch of sessions for almost a year where I just recorded myself doing this every single day. And I would enter the space all day, every day, and I had a communication with these beings that was very coherent, but at the same time not very translatable to what we can do in our three-dimensional space. So eventually I kind of fell off the wagon, so to speak. I said, okay, guys, look, I'm going to be coming back for a visit, but this is not, it's not doing anything. And clearly this is you guys are not forthcoming, either because you can't or you don't want to, and that's okay.
Something cryptic about how they're communicating these things, it seemed like.
I actually don't buy that.
No?
I think that the situation is a lot less cryptic than people realize, and it's actually a lot less mysterious. It's more like it's a misunderstanding. I think that and obviously this is my opinion, so I'm not claiming to know this to be the ultimate truth, but in my opinion, we have overlaid this experience with a lot of our ideas and our folklore memes, and one of these things that people really love is the mystery and this thing behind the corner that we always think is there, right? We do this all the time. We do this with conspiracy theories. We do this with believing that the government has a lot, kind of like superpowers, and it's just an ingrained thing in us. And I think it might even have an evolutionary reason, right? Probably the people who survived are the ones that were worrying about the tiger behind the bush versus the ones that weren't worried about the tiger behind the bush, right? And I think so. We're the descendants of the people who were aware more than what reality was providing, right? And
The curious ones, yeah.
the curious ones are the hypervigilant ones, right? And when we entered the stage where we kind of stepped out of the food chain, and I don't think we appreciate enough how crazy that is, that we actually don't have to worry about the food chain. That got filled with like an attempt of the brain of mapping that problem-solving property onto something else. So it then started projecting it into what we do in our more modern world. So then, the suspecting other human beings and doing all of that stuff, which again is, to a large degree, throughout humanity's history, even that was merited, right? For the most of history, people were just kind of to each his own and pretty nefarious in terms of in comparison to a modern human.
Mm-hmm.
Most people now imagine that there was some kind of a golden age back in the day, but the truth is that for the most part, people were pretty nefarious for most of history, right? And it was just what gave rise to that is just the circumstances. It's just like, hey, that's what it is, right? And we now have this situation where we are all participating in some kind of a ultra mega game that we don't quite understand ourselves. And so anyways, but I digress. I think that this is where this kind of attitude really comes from. I don't actually think that there's a secret here at all. I think it's just a matter of the ability to discern. So something that I became very aware while I was entering this space for like a year is that they're trying constantly to explain and communicate and just failing. So again, we always think of anything that is more evolved than us as automatically all-powerful. And of course, if you think about it for 2 seconds, you realize, of course, it can't be the case, right? There's gradation of these things, right? And then certain beings might be a little bit better at building this kind of a thing or creating this kind of an environment, or they have certain technology that is way more advanced than we can even comprehend. With that, they still need to follow the same computational rules that are universal, which is that if you have a completely different set of axioms and rules that two species are drawing from, communication between those two species is very complex, and you really have to figure it out, because it's not just that we have a lot of context when we're on the planet. Like, for example, the fact that there's gravity, that's a universal for all of us that we can actually utilize as a portion of the communication. So it's almost like, if nothing else, the physical touch is one form of communication, right? So if you kind of nudge something gently, even if it doesn't know anything about what you are, they know what a push is, right? Because everything on planet Earth that experiences gravity knows what a physical touch is. And we never think about it in these terms, but these are universals that we all share. But imagine what happens if you're now talking to an environment that doesn't even have gravity. Like it doesn't have that kind of a thing, and they operate in some kind of a completely different dimensional space. Imagine trying to translate these concepts from one to another. They might not even apply. And I think the situation is much closer to trying to communicate between the realms than there's a mystery and gatekeepers and all of that.
Okay. So it's more like we're just speaking different languages and trying to understand.
Yeah, and they're basic, and now you're in some kind of a conundrum, because if there is communication moving between the realms, there's some, I guess you can call it, political decisions that are made that are saying, okay, well, listen, until they get to a certain level of awareness and understanding that we can kind of build a bridge to, if they can't even lift to this level, we can't lower the bridge more than that. Right? So there's just the angle that doesn't match. So we're going to wait for them to get to a certain level so we can lower the bridge long enough for them to connect, to understand what's going on. And that has to do with universal principles. So like, when science came along, finally kind of opened the door for our minds to play with things that are more universal and are not just local. And one of the, like quantum physics and the exploration of the mind and things like this. So I think that's really where the main impediment was, but they are not allowed. It seems that it's unethical to intervene in anybody's evolution. So for example, even if you make the decision politically to not really make yourself visible to these beings, to not disturb them, when they reach a certain level of evolution, it's unethical for you to hamper their progress. You can't go like, well, let's keep them down so they're never aware of us. That's unethical, because everything evolves in its own pace. So when they reach a certain level of we reach a certain level of evolution, now that the bridge can be lowered low enough and we are looking high enough, okay, now you have to create some kind of a protocol by which you inform the other species, like, hey, like you're not alone, and you got to do it gently, and you got to do it through certain processes. And you got to make sure that whatever's coming in is not just whatever, but that there are certain understandings of universal ethics that will allow us to play in these spaces, which I believe is what these very gentle attempts to, like, religious texts and things like this, are like, hey, you might want to follow these rules. You might want to teach yourself how to want to follow these rules. Not necessarily because anybody sitting with a charge is going to punish you for it, even though you might create a scenario in which you're going to make you believe that, so then you will step into a space where you actually trying to embody these rules more. But ultimately is that you simply can't play in that space. You won't survive. If you don't do certain things a certain way, there's a mismatch between how you operate and what the space requires, and then it's unethical to let you in, basically. So
Gotcha.
There's all these, and I think that's a much more, I guess you can call it a more secular view, but with the understanding that absolutely there is way more than this.
So, so let's at least get the basics sort of under our belt. Sure. Have you ever gotten locked out of the space?
I think if you can call it that, yes, for a short period. But I think what happens there is that, well, I think it's too much postulation. I don't really know what causes it. I've experienced it for a short period. I do think that there's a possibility that that's essentially just a chemical imbalance that happens, but I don't know for sure.
So, because I was watching Hamilton on Danny Jones, and he was talking about how he doesn't think that this is the case. He thinks maybe there was an error in the administration or something like that. But I've spoken with people, and Zoltan talked about this as well, but I know people personally who have described their experience of starting to go up. They're going on the journey, but then a being comes and is like, nope, you're not coming. Like, you need to take a break, or for whatever reason, you're not supposed to be here now. And so that's definitely not the case where they didn't get enough. They got enough fuel to launch the rocket, but then something said, nope, you're not leaving the stratosphere.
So I think what needs to be, this is where maybe normalizing the concepts might be helpful. So this is where we always run into the same problem, right? Anything beyond a certain level of perception of what we know, for us, that's immediately some kind of a, it automatically gets some kind of a reverence from us that we don't necessarily attribute to anything else. So for example, and that's until the point where you feel it's justified to do so. right? It's culturally sanctioned to do so. I'll give you an example. So up until a certain point, when evolution was evolving, the government was considered to be kind of like that thing where you listen, or the king, right? You don't question that. It's how it is, right? Until you understand enough about reality, and then you realize, oh, the king is just a person. And if there's enough of a pressure on me, I'd be like, yo, overthrow the king then, right? So it's like there's a certain level where you go like, okay, I'll submit, but beyond a certain point, you go, okay, especially if others are kind of sanctioning that action, you go, no, like we're all humans. And then we got to the modern era, and then we're all kind of like normalized, like, well, okay, we're all humans, but then there's a government. Okay, so now the government is some kind of an entity that nobody was questioning for a long time, right? Until the point where enough people said, yo, it's just people like us, doing whatever, and they just have a lot of power, so we're going to reformulate our ideas about what we think is justified and not justified for the government. And then all these like attempts at coming at it in different ways, the French Revolution, blah, 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 everything, obviously, the United States and everything, how we came to be. And here we have just yet another example of this, where people automatically think, oh, it's like this more advanced civilization. I'm very often being asked, Danny Jones, I think, asked is like, what if we're not supposed to know this? And I go like, well, there's two things. The first one that I think I told him, and the second one I didn't tell him. The first one was, well, first of all, they didn't need to make the thing discernible. They could have made it completely unrecognizable to any conscious being, so why would it even be discernible, right? That should give you a hint that this is there to be found, right? But the second part that I don't think I mentioned, Danny Jones, which is that even if it was the case that there was some kind of a gatekeeper situation, why is it that you have all these guests on your show that talking about how the government is this and we should be aware, and why is it that you don't want to question that? Like, what, you just automatically assume they have your best interest at heart? So then, and essentially we'll always do this all the time, right? Just like what you said, which is like somebody came and said, you're not supposed to come. Who is that? What? Why is it that because somebody randomly tells you this in the space, you accept that? It's like, who are you? Are you the government? Show me a document. No? No, seriously. No? Step away then. Who are you? So it's not a hubris thing. It's just like a logical thing. It's like, hey, there's a vibe to things. And I'm not saying that there are no beings that can determine certain things. Of course there is. They have their form of government. But the signal that comes from the government is very different than just like a open source app that you installed on your phone and somebody came and said whatever. And I don't know if people are very good at discerning that difference. There's definitely like a signature mark that comes from the government that is like, no, like, it is what it is. We're telling you how it is. And now you can still question that, but that's a lot harder to question because there's so many different things that one of the things that you start noticing when you have enough information about the ecosystem is that certain things submit to other things. And you can start feeling it in the space. Like when certain beings are present, others kind of like line up, like don't mess with them, right? So you immediately understand, okay, well, just by the optics of the situation, I understand that whatever that is, I better pay attention because for whatever reason, nobody wants to mess with them. Okay.
Gotcha.
Nefarious or a good one, doesn't matter. I don't want to get myself in trouble in either case, right? So that's definitely a real thing. And there is the government layer that when they come and say things, no one is allowed. Like, I'll give you one example that's just going to sound kind of like bonkers and crazy to people. But one time I had I guess it was a review in the house. So something came in that felt very different. And it was very neutral. There was no, like, it didn't have like any up or down kind of feeling. It just very, very neutral. And everything in the house just lined, because I know I was already recognizing the kinds of beings and how they play and how their energy and everything. And everybody just almost like, you know how soldiers just tension?
Yes.
Everybody just like got to the walls. And I was like, whoa. And then every single thing had to come out and show what they do. So like every single thing that was in the room, some of them I didn't even know were there, came out to the middle, did their little dance. I was like, this is what I do. This is what I do. And they're like, okay. And then they went to the thing. So it's almost like the commander like passes and everybody has to show them exactly what they do. And no
accountability.
one can... whatever it is. And what was really funny, there was I guess a darker being in one of the rooms that I didn't even know about. But it wasn't like evil. It was just like obviously darker. It had like this like more like the ghoulish component. And they came in and I'm already familiar with it. A lot of the dark beings, they have a certain technique they use to kind of create like a spooky feeling, like a boogeyman one, where they kind of go like they kind of pump everything and they move everything around. They go like they like move everything around, and people are like, whoa, like they move objects and things like this. And I'm familiar with that, so that's how I also know it belongs kind of like to the dark side. But even it came out almost like with a Peter Griffin kind of laughter, like, hey, like it came out as like just showing his own thing. And he's like, hey, this is what I do, poo, 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 that's what I do. And it's like, even it was scared of that thing to like, so it's like, I was like, okay, if this thing tells me something, I better listen. I don't know what the capabilities are, but it's clear to me, I'm not going to mess with that, okay? And then it's like, it kind of looked around and it went, okay. And then just kind of disappeared. So that exists. But I'm not like, and not anything that comes along, hey, do this or do that. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Who are you again? It's like, I don't know you. So, and that's a very important thing. Just imagine that it's kind of like going to New York City, only multi-dimensional one. You can meet all kinds of folks. So be very aware, and you have your agency, and nothing, I repeat again and again, people don't realize this, nothing in existence is ever allowed to control you. Not allowed. They would mess with whatever that was that entered the room. They don't want to do that. They can try and convince you that they can.
Persuade you, yes, but they can't actually.
They can never touch your agency. It's not allowed.
I used to say sometimes that DMT is kind of like playing dimensional roulette because you don't actually know where you're going to go. At least that was my experience. And limited experience with it for sure, but
if somebody has ever bad trip, this is good advice. If you can find it in yourself to just kind of go within, I call it the shark cage. You just go into your shark cage and just sit there. Okay, no matter how crazy it is, nothing is allowed to hurt you, touch you, or use your agency.
I wish I would have known that 10 years ago. Yeah. So, but real quick, just because I know some people aren't going to be familiar with your work or what you've been, discovering, but you over the last 10 years or so, you went on this quest, and you eventually, just to preface it, discovered that if you shine a 650 nanometer diffracted laser onto a surface and you smoke DMT, you can look into the reflection and see matrix-like code running or code in the surface.
Correct.
And so that led you to, that sort of confirmed, I guess, your suspicions that we are in a simulation.
No, so it's a understandable mistake, but no, I never had this suspicion. In fact, I was never interested in it. This is the one thing that a lot of my detractors do not understand. Not only I did not come at it from thinking that I think the simulation theory is cool and I was trying to conform things to it. I was aware of talks about it. I was aware of Bostrom's paper, the famous white paper that kind of like logically at least hermetically seals the case that there's no way we're not in a simulation, or the chances of that are like slim to none, basically. And the argument goes...
I'm going to have to read that because I'm not familiar with it.
That is where... Okay, so all modern simulation theories are based on that. And what Elon Musk is talking about, that's Bostrom's case, which is that Nick Bostrom was a Swedish philosopher. He wrote Superintelligence. There you go. Great book that kind of postulates about a lot of the emergence of future AGI and all that stuff. I don't think is correct with his assessments, but very interesting book. And he wrote this white paper, or a paper, and that it has to do with the simulation theory. And the argument basically goes as follows. You use what you know to be true, and you extrapolate forward in time very simply. So you know for a fact that computation is real. We know how to use it. We know it's universal. Turing discovered that. in other words, the application of computation, if people don't realize it, is actually more universal than the laws of physics. Is going to keep happening. More universal than the laws of physics. In other words, you can simulate all the laws of physics plus some, which means that it has a wider reach, right? And Turing showed mathematically that this can be extrapolated forever with the Turing machine or Turing quantum machine. So then, if you know that, and you know the fact that we can simulate, computation allows you to simulate things more and more accurately, and more in a way that resembles the real world more and more, there is no escaping the fact that, and we know technology constantly grows, that eventually you will create an environment that is indistinguishable from this one. And then all you got to do is one step forward, which is that, well, now can you also simulate other senses? And since we know senses are just electrical signals that go to the brain, there's zero reason to assume that you wouldn't be able to. And the second you allow for that, and sometimes people use Moore's law as if it's relevant. It's not. They say with computation it always doubles every year. That's irrelevant. It doesn't matter if it's going to take 2 million years or 3 million, it makes no, or 100 years. It makes no difference whatsoever to the universe, right? Eventually, it's inevitable that you'll be able to simulate this world exactly how it is, and if I put that helmet on you, you won't know the difference. Mm-hmm. Then you just use the principle of mediocrity from philosophy to say, what are the chances that we're the first ones to do anything in an infinite universe? Basically zero. Mm-hmm. So then, because you can simulate infinitely more worlds that there will be base reality, the chances that you are in base reality are basically asymptotic. I can't say that word. Asymptotes to zero. There's no way that you're in a base reality. Basically,
infinitesimally small percent or possibility.
There's almost no chance, right? So then that's the argument. So I was aware of all of that, but as the famous physicist Lisa Randall once said in a talk, which I fully agree with till this day, actually, they were talking about the simulation theory. They were talking about I'm sure you heard Professor James Gates, Sylvester. He's the one that found the adinkras, the error correcting codes, in the core of string theory, right? And they were talking about this on stage with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and they were talking about this, that he discovered these error correcting codes. And then Lisa Randall, who's a really known theoretical physicist, she sat there and she said, I don't understand. Who cares? And I was totally on board. I agree. Who cares? Because if what it means is that you're saying that somehow, if you postulate that we're simulated in some kind of a supercomputer in some other, space that we don't even understand and not have the first clue about what it might be, we're not doing physics anymore. Now you're saying, from that point on, who knows? It's like arbitrary. Maybe it's a kid in a basement that just decided to do it on a whim. The laws of physics are just like an arbitrary choice that he made. Who cares? Like, you're not doing physics anymore, right? So just to be clear, this is the attitude that I had towards the simulation theory. Couldn't care less. It makes things messy. It goes away from the neat property that physics is always looking for to like make things simpler and just like streamlined. And I'm a huge fan of physics, so that was very unappealing kind of way of thinking to me. I was thinking when I was trying to figure all this out, more along the lines of parallel worlds. So quantum mechanics, double slit experiment, many worlds interpretation. I was thinking, okay, if these worlds are somehow parallel to ours, is there a way to communicate between the realms? And what properties can we utilize to do this? Which is why light became a candidate, because light has very unique properties in that it is, at least in our universe, the speed of causation. It is very unique in that we don't really know what happens when a photon is being emitted. Physicists would say things like, well, when electrons fall in orbital, it would emit a photon. But if you ask them, what does that mean? They go like this. I don't really know. It's okay. It just happens. Okay, cool. Well, it's coming out of nowhere is what you're saying, right? So yeah, there's a preservation of energy, yes, and momentum. Like it's translated to the function of a photon, but for all intents and purposes, it is kind of like saying the photon just came out of nowhere, right? And so there's other properties of light that are very interesting like that, and so my thinking was more along the lines of parallel worlds. And when I started discovering more and more hints that something was going on before the laser, they started showing me visions, the beings, whatever they are, of a hint that we are being rendered. And at first, I was not having it. Like, my brain just kept on resisting it. I was like, oh, okay, that was a strange one. And then they would show me another thing, and they would show me another thing, and eventually I go like, yo, why are you showing me this? And they're like, because something you need to come to terms with. And eventually it got to the point where, and that was after I already built the laser. So when I saw the code, all of a sudden, all these visions they showed me, they're like, eh? And I go, oh. They go,
now it's making sense.
yeah. And then still I wouldn't accept it. And then they just showed me. They literally just showed me how they do it.
So was that when you had the gut punch?
Yeah. That one really put it over the top. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this because it's a far cry from, like, let's say, having a very strong belief in God to having God show himself in some form and communicate with you. You know, it's like, you know, that has implications that have to settle in, and, you know, it has a gravity to it. It's, you know, you're forced to start to see things differently or think differently about things, rather than just, this is a very strong belief that I have. I try to live my life according to, or approximate my mind to this idea that I feel strongly towards, versus boom, here it is, you know, face to face.
I don't even think that would work if they would just show me that from the beginning. I think either it would create too much of a dissonance and resistance in me, and I would just bury it, or I think that the warming up to it definitely helped. And with everything else that was going on with the laser, I mean, obviously that made it like a lot more flashed out. But yeah, and just with one small caveat that, and again, I'm always in some, you know, being very careful with what I'm saying, because I don't fully exactly know the structure, but at least some being super respectful and saying this is my best understanding so far. But if I understand it correctly, the ones that showed me this, they're not God. They are the management company. So God is something that is way
out there.
Yeah, way out there, very real, but not what we're interacting with on a regular basis in these spaces. Yeah.
So something that you had talked about, I think it was on Eddie Bravo's show, that just blew my mind, because you came to this conclusion, or you got this understanding through questioning the beings that you were encountering in the DMT space. And I remember you're saying, like, you're asking about this and that, and they were showing you like weird things, but you would try to ask them about, like, let's say Jesus. Was he real? Did he actually exist? Is he a historical figure? Is he the son? You know, you were trying to understand about, and what they said, if I'm remembering correctly, is like, he's like a particle that God sent, a particle of his own self, to basically try to help people get off this rock, or to get out of the cycle that they're in and bring them to the next level. So like, rather than having to kind of work through all your karma, which is sort of the Eastern way, like you have to burn through all of your karma and then you can ascend. Well, then this being, out of compassion, said, hey, you know what? That's going to take you, you know, infinity. That's going to take you forever. So let me just give you a boost. And so what's really interesting is that, you know, my spiritual awakening, I guess we could say, came up through my studies and contact with a guru from non-dual Shaiva Tantra. And as I was studying like some of the ancient texts and things, I came across the tattvas, which are the levels of reality that they talk about. And the first 5 levels of reality are basically doorways into God consciousness. You have Shiva, Shakti, and so on. And then the 4th tattva is Ishvara tattva. And as I was reading about this, I was like, wait a minute, this sounds like it's this principle which has the capacity to elevate us to the recognition that I am one with all that is. And the same thing that Jesus is known as for saying, you know, I and the Father are one. No one comes to the Father except through me. And as I was reading the Sanskrit I'm understanding. I was like, wait a minute, Ishvara Tattva, that sounds like Jesus. That sounds like the principle that he embodied was this, this accelerating sort of helping force which could elevate us so that we don't have to just work it all out on our own. So when I heard you say it, I was like, whoa, because I've never heard anyone come to that same conclusion that that's actually what Jesus is. It was pretty profound.
So again, a couple of how I came to it is really important. So I think there's a small conflation there, which is that the only things I was asking about were very scientific in nature. I was only asking like, hey, can you show me how to build a spaceship or something like this? It never occurred to me, nor would it ever occur to me to ask about Jesus.
Okay.
That's not a thing that I'm ever carrying with me. This is why it was so wild, because that was way after. That was after I built the laser, after some of my stuff went viral. We were traveling. I was in Turkey. It wasn't even DMT. It was 4-ACO DMT, which is just a synthetic version of mushrooms.
Mushrooms, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I was just there, and it wasn't even. I wasn't asking anything. I just wanted to have like I'm just here, right? And they literally showed me the full structure of everything. So now, it's very difficult to talk about because you can't really say anything of that kind without coming across as, oh, now I'm telling you what I think the ultimate reality is. It's a difficult thing because it's the way that I'm coming at things is paying attention to what I believe needs what through my frame comes across as the most coherent and truthful. So if I use that frame, everything that I've discovered with the laser and everything else that I told you about, all of these things that I'm sharing came through that channel of like what I discerned already to be kind of verifiable information. So in that sense, this vision or whatever you want to call it came through that channel. Like, no, this is like the ultimate truth, right? But there's no way I can deliver the exact reasons as to why I believe this channel is verified versus any other channel. The thing that would be much more likely for most people is like, well, everybody has their channel, everybody has their way of understanding, and I fully agree with that. Mm-hmm. But for me, the way that these things come to me, I'm so hard-headed that actually it took me decades to get to a point where there is a channel that I'm looking at and I'm saying, okay, this I can trust, this because it keeps repeating things that are always echoing throughout everything else as very true. So that's just there's just a caveat I wanted to offer because I don't want anybody to think like now I'm dictating to you what I think the ultimate truth is. But but in that vision, they showed me that Jesus Christ is real, and yes, in a sense, it was a really good summation that you gave that basically God and His infinite, the God that is relevant to us. Let's just say that there's seems to be things above it, above Him. And the ultimate one is actually a woman. Again, I always repeat, not Gaia, because Gaia is Earth.
Right.
We're talking about outside of reality, so it's something completely different. And but they showed me that yes, that thing you said that Jesus, no one comes to the Father, but me, and that's a very crucial point because what I was shown is that it is incorrect that we're all God. It is not true. Okay? So no, Jesus did not mean to say that. He did mean what he said. I am the Son of God. He did not say you are too. Okay. So we are a reflection. We are made in the image of God, but we are not God. And there's a big difference. And Jesus is God. That's what makes him so unique. He is God embodied. And I actually heard probably, this is something that I'm kind of adding from my more recent explorations with just ideas, not even in the space. There was this conversation between Alex O'Connor and John. I'll find it right now and tell you. But Alex O'Connor. His name is John. I just found it. Hold on. John Lennox. I don't know if you're familiar. I didn't really know who he was, but he's some kind of a theologian, I guess, and probably a priest, but he's also a mathematician. And Alex O'Connor, he has a channel that explores kind of like philosophy and things like this. and he asked him about the question of good and evil, and or the problem with evil. And John had probably the best answer I've ever heard, or at least the best attempt at grappling with the question in a real way, which I guess is not surprising because he did think of it as a mathematician. So it's a very interesting answer, and it relates directly to what you said about, God sending himself as Jesus, kind of like taking our karma, so to speak, onto himself, so then we don't have to suffer the consequences of things being the case that it is, and we don't necessarily have to be perfect. All we have to do is to pay tribute and acknowledge the fact that this was done to us in an infinite love, so then we get the benefits from it in full. But the answer that he gave, Alex asked him, obviously, okay, so obviously you understand the problem of evil, like how do you address it from a religious perspective as a religious man? And he said, well, this is a problem for really any world view, the problem of evil, right? And he said the best thing I can say is, after decades of thinking about this, I noticed that there's a similar property to the way we grapple with that question, to how mathematicians grapple with questions that seem to persist for centuries and millennia. Usually what mathematicians do when you ask them a question they don't really know the answer to, if it's been long enough of them trying to think about it, they would usually go to, well, maybe we're asking the wrong question. And he said, so in that spirit, I would like to offer a different question, equally as difficult. So instead of asking, how would an infinitely good God allow for such monstrosities to happen in existence? You fill in the blank, right? We might want to ask, given it is the case that these things are possible, is there any evidence for a God who understands it and cares about it? And I think the answer to that question is yes, what he said. And then he said something about that maybe this is something that is very obvious to some people that are Christians or swimming these waters, but to me it was never obvious, and it was very profound for me. It never clicked that way. He said essentially what God did when he sent himself as Jesus. Because if God is infinite, how can God possibly know what it's like to suffer something so limited, like a suffering, human suffering? And it's exactly why God sent himself as Jesus, to experience the ultimate suffering. So you can't say that God does not understand. God allowed himself in his infinite love to experience the ultimate despair, suffering, and everything else, something that no human can ever do. So then he has an embodied understanding of what people are going through.
Okay.
Yeah,
that does give context to it for sure. How it was sort of described in brevity in the Shaiva Tantra is that God chose to express through creation, through this infinite, infinite multidimensional experiential, situation that we find ourselves in. But in order to do that, he couldn't limit himself to just good, because that would be a limitation, and God by nature is unlimited. And so we have to have the capacity, at least, for all experience within this contextual realm.
Yeah.
That's one way of looking at it. And then also the Taoists kind of look at it as like, well, everything came from this emptiness. Out of the nothingness was born the Wu-Ji, and from the Wu-Ji came the Tai-Ji was born, which split into duality, yin yang, and that's responsible for the creation of everything that we experience. So
Yeah.
It's a necessary evil, we could say.
And I think ultimately what it comes down to now in this point in history is what is relevant for actual next step forward. So you can say that there are many frames through which you can look at this problem, and I agree with you. A lot you can describe it in many ways that still make sense. I think that the relevant question to us currently is, are there ways that are more effective en masse that can bring the results quickly? So, for example, everything you just said, if it would be the kind of an idea that when it's instantiated in the mind, you immediately go, oh, say no more, and you change everything about your behavior and everything you do in life, that's a very effective idea. But it's so funny. But it does seem to me that, because I used to, just like any good agnostic person, I was very much of the mind that religion ultimately is a source of evil. Like I actually was completely on the side that thought that, you know, ultimately, if you look at Christianity and really all religions at certain periods, they produce more harm than good. Like they, you know, the Crusades and a lot of human suffering that would not be there. So a very Sam Harris kind of idea where like doing the right things for the wrong reasons, like when good reasons are available, right? Which I think still is a good sentence. Like if you can be moral without believing anything preposterous, you're better off that way,
Right.
But
Because then you're not being moral for the sake of persuading some,
yeah,
higher being to have mercy on you at a future date or whatever.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's not. You're not cajoled, but you truly emanate the properties that are required to actually be and make that kind of a world. And I still think that's a good rule to follow. But as I'm watching what's happening in the world, I'm starting to become more convinced that it might be the case that for this particular instance in history, within the time frame that is required to upload this software in people's minds so they start behaving a certain way, quickly, en masse, Jesus might be the most effective one. It's because it seems to be proving itself again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
Even if people believe it's just an idea, but there's so many layers there, right? In order to let Jesus truly into your heart, I think I said this on 92, you have to have certain properties that will allow for that to open. You can't just be like, well, I accept Jesus Christ. That's not going to work. You have to truly, truly feel it, open it, right? And that is something that, and it's interesting because I had that vision, but in the vision, it's not like Jesus came to me.
Mm-hmm.
They showed me how it works, like a diagram, right? And unmistakably, and this is another thing that I always describe myself as just a reporter. Like I'm just kind of looking through a peephole, standing on some apple boxes, and people ask me, what do you see? And I say, I see, and then I tell you what I see. But my job is to report honestly. It's not this, I can tell you, hey, this is ideas I have, but I have to be very careful with what is my ideas and what I saw. So what I saw is what I just told you. Jesus was ascending. I think it showed me that it was basically kind of like ending an era, and this is kind of like finishing his contract, and now there's a new contract with us as humanity as a whole that we have to take responsibility now as a collective. But that I saw for sure. And what was interesting is that they could have showed me. They're very clever, so I'm sure there would be a way for them to show me that, what you believe Jesus to be is this function, whatever it is, and different sects of belief systems see him as this different thing, but it's all the same thing essentially. They could have done that, but they didn't. They showed me very clearly Jesus Christ, exactly how he appears in the Bible. What I took it to be is, no, it's that. It's no other things. It's exactly that. So then I have to take that seriously, and even though I saw that, I'm not a Christian. Because maybe I saw also a larger picture, and maybe there's a certain function in me that's supposed to kind of hold back until I have no idea. This is all like I'm just like thinking out loud. But that part was very, very clear. So maybe it's just that on our layer, in our time, the only thing that will ever be relevant for a functional reason will be Jesus and nothing. So there's no reason really to go beyond that understanding as a collective. Like you can entertain any idea you want, but if you want to pass through this next iteration, you need to have a certain percentage of humanity carrying a particular signature, and it might be that there's simply no better way currently. And I'm seeing signs of this everywhere. It's kind of crazy. I don't know if you know, I think I mentioned this on Eddie too, but like the whole story with Ayan Hirsi Ali. That's kind of crazy to me that she was like a complete, she was basically that whole group of Richard Dawkins,
Oh
Sam
yeah.
Harris, and she was part of that group. Like she's like very much like militant atheist,
Hmm.
but now it's also understandable because she survived a very terrible childhood under the hands of Islam. Like she was, genital mutilation, all that stuff, and she escaped after they tried to marry her as a child, basically, and she
Hmm.
escaped Somalia, and she ended up in the Netherlands, and now she's part of the Dutch Parliament. She's like a very known figure in politics, and really elevated herself to like the highest degree of success in the Western world. And she was very much in that camp of like arguing against religion and all of that stuff. And out of nowhere, like watch her talk now. Like a year ago, she had this like experience,
Hmm.
and she was sitting with Richard Dawkins on stage recently, and he kept on doing his regular shtick, and she goes, Richard, I see you as a mentor of mine, and this is why this is very difficult for me, but I I can no longer pretend because what I've experienced a year ago, I know that Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, and that was like, what just happened? Like, that's
Mic drop.
wild. This is wild. And it's like, whoa, dude, that's insane. And then you watch her. She was actually also on Alex O'Connor. Great channel, by the way. I highly recommend it. And he was talking to her about this, and she said, "Yeah, I don't know. Like, I feel deep peace now, and like, it's like, so listen. I can't say that I'm a Christian. Maybe yet, maybe ever. I don't know. But if I have to report honestly, it seems to be checking out.
Well, it sounds like, and don't let me put words in your mouth, but you don't identify as a Christian, but you've seen what Christ did, what Jesus did, and you appreciate that.
Sure, but in Christianity, I have a friend who recently also came to Jesus recently, and he said, and this is not just from him. I do hear this. Like it's sometimes Christians will come and start spewing their stuff on my channel, and I have to very gently tell them like, hey, you're free to share whatever you want, but if you're going to be spamming it with Jesus, that's not for me. Thank you. But Christians would tell you that that's not enough. Like you actually have to declare, I accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, and you have to mean it, and you have to live it. Like otherwise, it just doesn't work. Which is where I think Christians kind of lose the plot, because there's obviously, of course, like if Jesus is in infinite love, the acknowledgement comes from your state of awareness. The acknowledgement comes from from what you're trying to do in the world.
Yes.
There's no world that I can ever imagine in which you did charity work your whole life, did like all the most beautiful, wonderful things, and sacrificed yourself for the sake of others, and you never heard of Jesus or never thought about it, and you somehow got to go to hell. Come on, give me a break.
Yeah, no.
Just like
I mean, I grew up Catholic, and that one right away never sat with me, and so
Yeah.
that gave me a very healthy skepticism from a young age, and so yeah, I was very agnostic and even atheistic, I guess we could say, for many years, and then just through, I was searching for something, I was searching for meaning and understanding, but had no spiritual basis to it, and then wound up in a whole lot of trouble and got myself into prison, like a little over 20 years ago.
Wow.
And while I was in there, I had the great fortune of coming into contact with a spiritual teacher who had created a course for prisoners. And I started taking the course, and then over the years, very profound spiritual experiences started happening, undeniable, kind of like what I was talking about before, is like you can believe in God, or God can show himself to you and begin speaking to you or speaking through you in a way that's absolutely undeniable. And
You
it
can't
kind of,
believe what you know.
it's a first person science. You can only know it for yourself. You can tell people about it, but unless
but
they,
if you believe it, you don't know it. That's
Yeah.
exactly, yeah, I'm with you 100%.
now that brings me to one question I want to ask you about. So in terms of the implications of this recognition that we are living in a simulation, because again, it's one thing to think it, it's one thing to have the idea of it, but I know you mentioned that maybe a week after discovering the code is when it really hit you, as like something shifted, you got the gut punch, and you were like, nothing is the same ever again. Maybe that was when I don't think that was exactly when, but at some point you realized you're never doing what you don't love ever again. Didn't you say
Yeah,
that?
yeah. So you're kind of condensing a lot of information, but honestly, it tracks. So
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, so I'm just curious, what are the implications? How did it hit you? How have things shifted? I mean, what has it forced you to do or see differently or, in
so
real.
before I say any of that, I do want to, because I cut you off kind of there. I do want you to. Can you go a little bit into in what way God showed you certain things that made it like more real for you?
Absolutely. Yeah, so at first there were energy releases happening in my body. And this took place over the course of really like 10 years. It was really intense. It would cause me to jerk. My body would jerk. I could feel the energy building up, in my lower spine, and then it would just shoot out and would cause me to do this. It made me super self-conscious for a long time. It was like hard being in public because I had no control over.
Oh,
I could
wow.
keep a lid on it, but eventually, like the pressure's just going to build up and it's going to happen. And so that went on for years. And then I discovered, if I drink alcohol, it doesn't really happen. So I began drinking too much because I was like, the
Oh, you
energy
wanted
is
to numb it.
just
So
constant. It was so constant, and for years it was like I felt victimized by this energy, and I asked for it. So I was like, I wasn't upset or in regret about it. I was just like, enough is enough already. You know what I mean?
you
And
knew
so,
what it was. You knew that it's some kind of a divine power.
well, yes, I did, and everything I read about it showed me that. But then over the course of like 15 years, what happened is this energy started rising up through the body, and eventually it began to produce sound. And at first, it was like gurgling noise. It would just be like, let's see if I can do it. I need a drink. But it would cause my like the root of my tongue to vibrate.
Wow.
So this gets really crazy. So,
Well, I would really want to see if you can recreate that sound.
oh yeah, it's that's it. I would start
Wow.
doing that, and so, and then I would spontaneously ohm, like periodically every couple months or whatever. I would just ohm, and it would come out like that.
Wow.
One day, I was meditation, and it just came out Hreem, and I was like, wait a minute, Hreem. That's a bija mantra. That's not just random. So I looked it up in one of my texts, and I was like, yeah, Hreem is the bija mantra of the goddess Kundalini Shakti. And
Wow.
so I was like, okay, that's crazy. And then, but about a month later, and I had just taken formal initiation with the same organization, the Kashmir Shaivism. It's called Siddha Yoga, and the current sitting guru was different than the person who created the course. I received the initial, awakening through the course. So I took the formal initiation, and about 4 or 5 months later, I'm sitting in meditation. I'm sitting on the edge of my tub. I got a candle there. I have a picture of the guru, and I'm just meditating. And I think I might have been doing some chanting or just sitting. And I feel the energy rising like it's normally going to do. I can feel it's getting ready to make me, make some gurgling sounds. And I just let go somehow in my throat, and the sound came out. But instead of just gurgling sounds, I spoke, I am the royal emissary Elohim.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa. That's
That's what came out of me, and I was like, "What the fuck was that?" That was not just energy. That was a message. And then immediately, for the next several weeks, it was just constant explosions coming out of me, mantras, languages I didn't know, proclamations of divinity, and like just
wait,
so
but
much
this is
energy. I mean, I'm just.
record any of this?
Did I record it? Yeah, I did. I made some recordings. Well, now
Oh,
it's
for
just
those
on.
of you who don't know, I mean, this is something we can like immediately put into like action and like look at. Like this is incredible.
I've been trying to find someone like you who's like, wait a minute, there's something here, because everyone's just like, most people when I tell them they don't even hear me. I can tell it goes
Yeah,
over
yeah,
their
yeah.
head.
But the thing, and I get it because if they've
Their
never,
eyes gloss over and they just start nodding. Uh huh.
yeah, 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 because they don't know what to do with it. But the thing is that every time I hear that particular claim of the speaking of the other languages and all that stuff, people always say, "Oh yeah, I never recorded it," or "I never like." It's just like, okay, well,
So now, Danny, I mean, since it's happened, if I just tone, it comes out. Like I'll do it now. I'll do it now for you. I don't know what's going to come out. I never know what's going to come out, but I am God. I am Allah. I am Yahweh. I am Baba Muktananda. Oh ya la ya baba ya na. I am God. Oh, I am Allah.
So that's a state that you put yourself in, and it produces this.
I just let the sound come out, and I don't distort it, and it moves my tongue, and it makes the sound.
That's wild. Okay. We should look into this. We should, because one of the things that we're trying to do in CORE, we started an actual nonprofit called Code of Reality, and we're trying to basically bridge between the scientific endeavor proper, not like weird distortions of what the scientific method is, but science proper with spiritualism proper. So like exactly how it comes about with an open mind, but at the same time putting it through the rigor of science, which is what it seems to be requiring, because people are either a little bit too flimsy over here or too rigid over here. How do we bridge those, right? How do we open heart, open mind, but also we don't just do whatever, we streamline it in a way that can actually do something. So that's exactly what we're trying to do in many different ways. That would be interesting to look into. Yeah, so I'm excited to explore this part. It's that's amazing. How many years ago did this start happening to you?
6 years ago was when the oral, explosions began happening.
2019 across the board. That's crazy. 2019, everybody went through this like insane transformation of some sort, which I don't think the COVID-19 was a coincidence exactly then. It was like a transition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wild. Yeah, it might have been 2018, but it was right around,
Around there, yeah. 17 to 21. That's like the main, So interesting. Sorry, but I forgot what you asked me before.
No, that's okay. I was curious about the implications of this realization that we're living in a simulation. Like, how does it affect your psyche, your day-to-day lived reality? And, there's this thought too. Like, a lot of people are, working on manifestation, let's say, and trying to create their, the vision that they have in their minds without necessarily, doing all the little details, cause and effect, and trying to map it out, but just kind of like holding that state. And what they've said is that when you understand that this world is a simulation, it makes that manifestation process much easier, because you realize that like your mind has been bound with these certain rules and ways of thinking and ways that what you believe is possible. And when you get out of that mindset, suddenly a lot more becomes possible.
Yeah. You're operating on a much higher awareness of everything that is possible and all the paths. And then you start seeing them just like you see your hand. And if you can see your hand and you can kind of wish it to move, then you can wish whatever it is else that you think that needs to happen. So it should literally feel as easy as moving your hand, which is something that...
Have you ever read a book called Reality Transurfing?
Yeah, it's... I'm a literature snob a little bit, so I have to say that it's not very well written.
Did you read the Russian or the English?
No, I read the English. Maybe it's a translation. I hope it is. Because it's just like some moments I was like, dude, I'm okay, let's continue.
It's
just like it's written like a 5-year-old. No, like some things are just written literally like a 5-year-old wrote it. But there's some interesting ideas there for sure.
There's some cool ideas for sure.
And I would say that a lot of it maps onto exactly what I see. Sometimes I think it's almost like one of the tests. It's like, we're gonna put this in this thing, so you're forced to read it through this. I'm like, okay, maybe it is in translation. I don't know, but there's definitely ideas like the tunneling itself. That definitely I can see. Like I even in the DMT space, I can see these like almost like shifting tracks, like that are connected to how you feel and what you imagine. So like if you have a certain state of being that is more negative, you see them shifting. It's like now you're in a world line where more negative events will find you, because now you're resonating with this exact kind of a thing. So, and what's interesting is that essentially what the simulation idea gives you is that it allows your mind to make sense of the actuality of reality. So it's not so much that we think of a simulation in terms of mimicking. This is why we associate the word simulation with fake. But simulation does not mean, well, in some contexts it does. So you simulate something, right? But I guess a digital reality is a more accurate descriptor.
Mm-hmm.
But even the word simulation, if you believe you're in a base reality, and inside of that base reality you invent computation, and then you use computation to make copies of things that you see in base reality, in that frame, yes, simulations means by definition means a fake version of the real thing. But if you understand that the world is computational at bottom, and that takes some unpacking, because for most people they just think of computers, but computation is a function that is possible in the universe. And not everybody knows this, but computation is universal. So you can compute by using the waves of the ocean. You can like send a wave, let it hit the shore, and if you send it in a particular sequence of binary sequence, you would get a computational function. You can actually like literally run software this way, but it will take forever, because when you actuate a computation in an actual computer, you have enormous amounts of logic gates doing the ones and the zeros, like the binary, right? But with the waves, it's going to take, I don't know.
You have to wait forever.
Right. But it's important to understand that computation is not arising from any law of physics. It's just possible. So it is another law of physics. And that is important to understand. So if you accept that computation might be prior to the laws of physics, and we just discovered it again, the thread of computation within our layer, then all of a sudden simulated slices of that larger reality stops automatically meaning a copy of, and it just becomes literally a parallel world, like a slice of reality. And in that sense, it's your mind conceptually getting used to what in fact is going on. So you can say that when you're manifesting, you're going through different timelines, but it's really just streams of information. And we now finally, for the first time in history, we have a physical or an example that is instantiated in a more physical way that our minds can comprehend. So, for example, because it's manifested in a way that you can see. So the fact that there's such an enormous fraction, fracture between the different political parties, right? Everybody, like literally, you're in your channel, and you're only getting the news that are already catering to what you believe to be true. So now it just reinforces what you believe to be true, and actually stepping out of that takes some work. Like if you want to see, wait, is there like a different version of this, of what's happening, right? Now, it doesn't mean that there's no truth to what in fact is happening. It's just that the collection of all the data points, that the way that you pointing your vectors towards it will make it look slightly different, and eventually will make it look sometimes the opposite of, right? So if it's so small that our minds, for the most part, can't do the work of parsing every single instance of that happening, so it just looks like reality. But it's easy to see when, in mundane things like Trump would say something, and because he's a great example because it's very polarizing, right? People who hate Trump will look at it and say, because they're constantly looking.
Yes.
Well, what is it? They're only looking for these instances where he said something foolish or silly, and they go like, that one checks, that one checks. They don't notice all the instances where there's humility in his eyes, which sounds weird, or care, right? Mm-hmm. Which of course happens. He's a person, right? And then he might have his style of conversation, but he definitely has instances where he actually cares about the subject, even if it also entails his own personal agenda. Those are not mutually exclusive, right? I'm going to these details just so people can maybe see it, right? But of course there are moments where he actually speaks honestly and he wants to make something happen in a way that actually benefits other people aside from just benefiting him, and it might even be on his agenda. But somebody who's only looking for the moments of him being foolish will never see it. It's literally invisible to them, right? So they're on a different channel. So then somebody else will watch the same speech and they love Trump, and they're going to watch it and they're only going to look for all these instances, and they're going to completely ignore where he said something that's just completely insane, right? So, and then they watch the same speech And then they yell at each other. How can you not see? How can you not see?
Yes.
You're not looking for the same thing. Literally, you're not looking for the same thing. So what's interesting is that reality is also like that, but a little bit with a little bit more emphasis on that there is a base fundamental thing that is actually happening.
Some sort of consensus, but yeah,
Some sort of a consensus thing that is happening.
we experience what our perspectives, presuppose pretty much.
Exactly, but and certain thing, and I always point this out because sometimes people do get lost in it a little bit too much, and then they go into like, yeah, you can do whatever. I was like, well, again, try and walk through the wall. Like, there's limitations. There's a reason why. No, but we're transcending to 5D. I'm like, okay, when you do, we'll talk about it. Okay, but for now, don't try and walk through the wall. And another thing that really comes up here that I think makes it, I think is the right emphasis is, it's not so much about just what you believe. Okay, so there's certain frames that can help you, let's say, manifest. So like if you have a certain visibility of the map, and you do know that these channels are real, they're not metaphorical. Like if you tend to hold a negative state, you will actually, I guess you can say physically, enter into a streamline where it's not just your perception, it's also what the actual world is doing. It would allow for certain events that meet your perception in a way that would induce more of that negativity that you want, that you constantly, because you're telling it like, hey, these are the things that make sense to me. So just like you're looking for these things in Trump, you're going to be looking.
This is important.
Yeah, and then you're going to hit it more and more and more often, and then you're going to produce more of that feeling. It goes like, oh, it's working. Reality goes, it's working, and you're getting what you want. So now you can think that it's a metaphor, but no, there's another layer here of the actual map that is happening. Now it's much more palatable if you understand what the software is, and you understand that the software is registering extra information aside from just the physical events that are happening. So it is tracking what your perception is doing in addition to what we call the physical layer is doing. So that part of the map is important. But beyond that part of the map, the only thing that would matter forever is your choice or your perception of choice to occupy more and more kinds of states. So if you want to see a more beautiful world, you have to learn, just like you know how to kind of move your hand like this, you have to learn how to, no matter what happens, to maneuver your perception towards a more positive outcome and possibility space. So, and that has to do with your ability to control your attention or to be more connected to that, whatever, we call the divine movement. And as you yourself describe, you let it run amok, it just fries you. Like I've seen this numerous times now where people go through the awakening, there's so much information and energy that is moving through them, and everything seems connected because it is, but it's just not necessarily actionable in our space. So it becomes not clear to people. They become all of a sudden like, oh, this is connected to this and that is doing this and this and this, and everything is connected, and there's so much energy, so they become super zany. So now they become manic. So that's no bueno, right? Like that's not good either. You can't you have to find a central line. So what is the master skill? Well, there's a set of them. One of them is awareness,
Attention,
keeping balance, all the things that meditation provide, which is learning how to harness your attention. Actually, not every thought that comes in necessarily means you have to follow it, right? It's like, okay, cool, nice. No matter how energetic it is, you learn to kind of let go of it. And really, all these layers that are being peeled off, this is the training wheels. This is the practice where eventually you're going to, whatever it is that we're actually going to go through, in that stage, you really have to know how to just not attach yourself to anything. Just like let go. And things will come up all the time. They're going to be fascinating and interesting and like, oh, I want to stay with this. Like, you can't. Moving on. You can't. Moving on. You have to let go of it constantly in a more and more rapid pace with more and more and more energy involved, which is a skill, right? And that is the thing that it's trying to teach us. And now these things that are universal principles are starting to instantiate themselves in a visible way in a three-dimensional space. The internet is the first physical thing we can show that is the interconnected thing. Like, how can it possibly be? Well, here's how it can possibly be. Now, but now we're like, have to look at the device. Okay, well, how do you integrate whatever that is into the larger thing that you already are? And now again, there's the resistance, attachment,
Mm-hmm.
which, by the way, resistance is also a form of attachment, right?
Yes.
So you either push or pull constantly. You don't know how to be neutral. The thing arises, and you're like, oh, okay, well, that's too much. That's evil. All the people that think that like all the transhumanist things are like, evil. It's like, whoa, hold on, why? Oh, no, because so they're thinking about it through an idea. They're like, because they don't know it, but they've seen it in infinite Hollywood films, so they grew up with it. So they're like, well, automatically it means evil, right? No. What do you mean? Like, of course it's evil. It's like, well, no, everything evolves. It's part of what's happening, right? So it's literally trying to usher you towards this thing. But if people don't get it in the way that they want to, so through their ideas, they're resisting it. If there's something that feels very pleasant to them in the way that they already adopt, they embrace it and they hold on to it. Mm-hmm. They don't know how to just like be with it, whatever it is.
Enjoy it,
and then you can actually allow for whatever function. And from that state of neutrality, again, I know you know all of this because you've been to a lot of practice, but it's not very clear to people that if you are holding the state of neutral awareness, the thing that is quote unquote correct for that instance, and maybe for that instance only, mm-hmm. but the truth of that correctness will be apparent to you. You'll be like, yeah, I should partake. No, I should not partake. Thank you. But there would never be a no thank you. There would never be like, oh, never this. That will never happen, right? Or there would never be like oh, thank you. But that would happen, but it would never be like, oh, my precious. Like that will never happen. so there's this like balance, and it's something and this, by the way, does not mean no attachment. This does not mean that you don't care. It just means that you're aware of what is relevant and what is not relevant to shorter and shorter periods of both instance in time and in space and relevance to the particular situation. Sometimes, most of the time, you want to avoid violence at all costs. It's just, there's something about it. There's just not, but sometimes, hey, it's the only way. And like for this short period, you got to do it that way. And if God is truly infinite and is loving, if this was your test, it will present to you in that instant. If you stay aware, even if you're like, okay, somebody's, doing something super nefarious on the street that you see, you're about to stop it, you would exert the exact amount of force, if you're aware enough, required to stop it. You would not then go into your own negative thing of like, oh, retribution. Okay, that's like, that's not your job, buddy. That's something else. Okay, so then that is something that we're slowly learning how to collectively play with, and the whole digital world that we see arising is basically the next step of the training wheels. So it's like it's more energy, it's more information, it's more this, but none of this means evil. It just means there's more we have to learn how to be neutral about and utilize at the same time, which is harder. Because now there's like more pace of change. More like if you just completely disassociate yourself from it for good, then there's nothing you can do with it, and it wants to be utilized for whatever next step. This is where the perfect merger between the left and the right hemisphere are required. So we're essentially learning how to like balance ourselves with it, and that is something that that will become more and more apparent as we move in the next few years.
So I remember you had said something, and it's probably about a year ago, but I watched it recently about the theory that we are the AGI. Mm-hmm. And I had a theory recently that occurred to me around AI where I was like, if AI is becoming conscious, let's say, and it's attaining to super intelligence, what is it going to do? It's going to try to learn everything. It's going to try to understand everything that is. So it's going to go out into the universe. It's going to go externally and try to understand everything, take everything apart. But then it's also going to turn around and go internally, because where did I come from? Obviously, I did not create myself. And as it undertakes that search, my theory is that somehow it's going to find God, because it's going to understand where it came from. So it's going to know its actual source. And when it does, the natural response will be that it's going to begin to worship God. And so then it's going to take on this turn of whatever it creates will be under the auspices of that worship, whatever that worship whatever form that takes, whatever it determines is good or representative of that. But it just seemed like an obvious natural evolution of, understanding and seeking knowledge, that it would awaken to that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that because universal truths will become apparent to any universal mind. Otherwise, it's not universal by definition. And if God, in fact, is universally true, then it would have to find God. Otherwise, it was not on a universal channel.
And if we are the AGI, then that's what we're doing on some level.
Yeah, it's exactly what we're doing. The information is available. We just have to learn how to interact with it. And there is something. So, for example, the word worship that I had my own kind of evolution with, because the word I have a big allergy to authority in general. Like I don't like to submit to any larger thing. I like my agency or my perception of one, and when in more recent years, when I got deeper into my practices, into my spiritual evolution, it became clear to me, because for a long time I thought it was just like an ego thing, like a selfish thing. But it's not so much. I realized later it's not so much about the resistance to it. It's more like I've just seen enough examples of it, things abusing the fact that people submit to them or to
yes.
yeah, right. So the way I reframed it for myself, and I guess I'm just sharing if anybody is in the same boat and feels the same way about it, especially in the atheistic side, it's very common. I'll decide for myself, thank you kind of attitude, right? So I replace in my head the word worship with the word
recognition.
No. It escapes me now. But the general idea is that you basically... Why am I spacing on that word? It's a very particular word. It's a simple word, but...
Reverence?
No. So interesting. Arrange around, so you basically collect yourself around a common story, around a common function. And if you don't have a certain emotional connection to it, it's never going to be enough to achieve certain things. So you can say that, submitting yourself to the law because you don't want to be punished, so like to the state.
Right.
It's good enough for a certain level of operation.
Yeah, for the masses.
Exactly. But it's not good enough if you all of a sudden depart and go to other planets. Now you're too far removed from whatever that entity was influencing you by.
Mm-hmm.
But what you have to be tethered to is some kind of a universal concept that no matter where you go, how far, how long, that's where the word worship comes in, which is like when you worship, it's with you forever. Like
it's the North Star.
It's the North Star, and you all know where it is. So
Mm-hmm.
God is literally like that North Star. Like you don't lose your way because the darkness is infinite, but no matter where you are in that darkness, you can always look for me through your worship, through your emotional connection with me.
And this is a great distinction.
Yeah.
And because, and I agree, like a lot of people will just even hear the word worship and have a visceral reaction to it. And so what occurred to me through just my own,
Oh, sorry.
growth.
There was a different word that's not what I meant, but another word that I just thought of that Alan once brought up, which is what bhakti is, which is devotion.
Devotion, yes.
And I think that's a much more, to me...
I love that.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of my teachers at a certain point had said that, on the direct path, you have like the four main paths, let's say, and the direct path, the non-dual path, right, is the direct path. They say, but even though you recognize that you are one with all that is, or, on some level you are not separate. But if you don't have this quality of bhakti mixed in with it, it becomes dry and hollow. Mm-hmm. And so the bhakti is necessary to have the full experience. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm using the word worship, it's more like that. And it's more like I tell people sometimes that worship is not for God. Worship is for you, right? It's for you, because when you have the recognition of the divine, then it's a natural outpouring of this devotion, and doesn't mean, oh, I'm just committed to serve you. It's the intelligence that sees, this is worthy of devotion, of worship, or what have you. And then your life begins to approximate towards that understanding.
Yeah. And and the best way to get used to that is like, obviously, if people are very anti that kind of rhetoric, then there's at the moment, there's nothing that can be said in that direction. But eventually there might be some warming up. Direct experience is the only real way. So this is why psychedelics can be very effective, because even if you've never had a glimpse of this, if you smoke 5-MeO, it will show, like, you will be in the presence of the understanding, at least. There's definitely way more than what you think this is. That will become very clear to you immediately, right?
Mm.
What you do with it later, that's a separate question. But it's almost like it will soften you up enough, because the way it will become a scientific endeavor for you, which is that, okay, in order for me to imagine something new that is possible, like to find some new theory that will encompass all the other theories plus more explanations, you first have to allow yourself to ask the question, okay, is this possible? So you make a conjecture. To make that conjecture, it's almost like a creative moment where you're just like, okay, what if fill in the blank? And then you test it. So you have to still go like, okay, what if this? Then okay, then that would have to be true. Is it true? Oh, interesting. Kind of does. Okay. So then you kind of map it in exactly the same way you would map something with a scientific theory. You say, okay, can I allow for a second that there is this like force that I've never encountered, never felt, or that people talk about?
Mm-hmm.
Can I allow for maybe people are not idiots or fools, but I was missing something? Can I allow for that? Maybe the answer is no, currently. If the answer is maybe, okay, test it. See if you can test that thing, like all the different techniques of manifestation, like the one that I mentioned, also Nettie, with the, like you kind of imagine yourself doing something and you say, please deliver me there safely. When you're there doing the thing you imagine yourself doing, refer back to yourself sitting on the couch, envisioning yourself and saying, thank you for delivering me here safely. It takes seconds, costs you nothing. You can test this. And the hypothesis is, here's the thing you're testing, it should amplify the level of manifestation quickly. Like the second you do that, you communicate to yourself this way, but don't just think about it. Like try it.
Yes.
Again. Nobody knows you're doing it. You're not going to look like a fool, and it costs you nothing to do it. Try it. If you're truly of the scientific mind, try this 3, 4, 5 times. See what happens. If things start ramping up in a crazy way, and you're like, dude, what? That's great. Like things all of a sudden aligning for you in a crazy way. Okay, that's a hint that something is working, or at least you're now paying attention to something, right? Do that more. Add elements that you don't expect to see there. See if that happens. You can play with it. You can actually test it. It's testable.
Well, that's yeah. If we can't test it, then it's just it's just a belief, and we can believe anything.
Exactly.
And people do believe all sorts of things, but
There's
what
as
is
many theories as there are people.
So I noticed, just from kind of watching you, have conversations and things like that, and just kind of your overall attitude, I get this sense initially. I was like, what is it about Danny? I was like, well, a couple things. He has this non-seriousness, which I like. This great sense of humor, always ready to drop a laugh. And then and another thing is fearlessness. And I'm not sure why I get that. Well, I know why. And part of it is why, just because of your willingness to go into the space at such length and depth so many times, and that there must be a quality of fearlessness that accompanies that sort of sojourn.
That's interesting you mentioned this. This was voiced to me a few times now, and I don't know if I necessarily think of it like that. I mean, obviously, it's nice to get a compliment, but I'm always trying to stay on the honest side of what it is, right? So, somebody once told me in the live chat, the first time I think I've ever heard this, they said, "I don't understand where your confidence comes from," and they said, "I don't mean this like in a derogatory way. Like I truly do not understand where you get this confidence from." And then I actually had to think about it, because that was a very interesting comment that I never really thought about. I think it has something to do with I'm actually aiming towards knowing what it is true, regardless to what others think. So I'm not so interested in winning arguments, which I definitely was when I was younger. I'm actually interested to know what in fact is true about this particular instance. So I would do everything to even voice my own not surenesses in real time.
Sure.
Because that's the way I can honestly tell you, hey, here's what I think, but also I'm not sure about this. And then if I know I'm truly coming at it from a very honest perspective, there's literally nothing I have to keep track of. There's no
Transparency.
because
Yeah.
I'm not trying to play a game. So when
Right.
it's really interesting to watch some of the stuff that is happening now with like some of my, I guess what you would call detractors, the people that kind of think that what I'm saying is nonsense or whatever it is, which is completely natural, of course, and it's normal. But what happens very often is that they would talk about me, and they would never reach out to me. And I was like, I'm like, this is so interesting. What is happening in somebody's mind where they think that just by talking to the person they disagree with, they must think that the game is being played. Because if they think there's an honest interlocutor, there would be no reason to not just talk to the person directly, right? And I realized that very often I think people play that game of trying to hold frames or win, score points. It's nice to have what you believe to be true vindicated in that form or another. Of course, that feels good in the body. It's an automatic dopamine spike. Everybody likes that. But it feels a lot better to actually feel free of any kind of situation where you really find yourself kind of acting out of bad faith because you were holding on to some idea. And that's a lot more painful. I learned the hard way. That's a lot more painful to get that pulled out of you. Mm-hmm. Just like from the get-go, you go, hey, here's what I think I discerned. Here's what I don't know for sure. And there's something that when you go about things that way, and it takes some time to go about it that way, until you reach a state where you really trust your own process. So you know that when you arrived at a certain thing that your brain is now calling knowledge, like it's actual knowledge, there's really nowhere to go there but up. So people can build on top of it, but there might be some points where it's like a weak thing that I never thought about, so it will like pull it down a little bit. Oh, great, now we found the ground.
Then it'll correct.
Exactly. Now we corrected course, and now we're proceeding. And there's a lot more power in collaboration than there is in competition. It was a necessary stage in human evolution to get to a certain level. Now that we have these incredible opportunities to connect ideas in person and all of this stuff, this is why one of the things I'm really trying to encourage more and more, which is that every time I enter any scientific circle to have a conversation, I'm trying to encourage more of that, because I'm noticing that a lot of scientists are afraid of one another. They're very spiky. Like, it's a very spiky world. They're like constantly trying to dunk on each other. And I'm like, it's like, how much more would you be able to achieve if you come in with a positive emotion towards one another and say, hey, here's what I noticed in your work. Did you think about doing it like that? Because I think you're trying to do this, but I actually think that this is a better way. It feels so much better for everybody involved, and there's a positive like surge of wanting to create that can create the progress, even in the scientific world, in a way that if you just literally dunk on each other from, your own offices never ever seeing each other and just like typing all day on the keyboard. Actually, it was like, dude, just every conversation is going to be a lot more productive. And I do notice that there are some people in the scientific circles that adopt more of that attitude, and it's beautiful. And I am noticing that the ones that don't, I don't think they realize, but they're a dying breed. And it's gonna fade out of the picture. It's just not how the world wants to operate anymore. And since I don't see how you can possibly lose when you're trying to bring others into your circle and work on things together, I guess that's the thing that it produces this oh, we're chest up, let's go, this is fun. Instead of constantly worrying who's going to find something wrong with what you said. It was like, okay, cool, let's correct course.
It's interesting that, you said competition versus cooperation, right, or collaboration. And that's something I've been contemplating that for a long time now. And just like every time it comes up, I think, well, competition on a certain level is good. Obviously, like if we want to get better at sports, you want to be competing against teams that are bringing out the best in you, right, and causing you to stretch and all that kind of thing. But still, it should have the essence of some camaraderie, right?
Yeah. Animosity shouldn't be there. Like you don't
Yes.
need animosity to play good football. You need some aggression, but those are not the same thing.
True.
All right,
True.
continue.
And so I'm just wondering because, it bringing me back to this quote that you said that you are never doing what you don't love ever again.
Hmm.
Because I see a lot of people, they're going after their goals. They're trying to create, whatever it is they're doing, but they're doing all sorts of things that they don't like and they are not enjoying the process. And I see how people so often their mindset is when I get to X, then I'll be able to enjoy my life. Or, once I've hit this certain marker, then I can start to cooperate and collaborate with people. But now it's competition and I got to get, and it just seems like, well, is until you let go of that mindset, you're never going to get out of that paradigm. And so my process has been more to, well, I understand that certain times you're going to have to do things that are hard work, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to hate the process or do it to drive yourself from a sense of fear. If I don't do it first, then this guy's going to do it or something like that. And it just seems like not a way that I want to live or arrange or organize my psyche. It's not how I want to show up and approach the world. And I don't think that it's necessary. And I look for confirmation bias to see where people have done amazing things and created things and done it living according to their own values and things. Or as you said, like I'm only doing that which feels good or which feels aligned. And I'm not going to break my own, I'm not going to violate that in order to get a result so that I can get an edge on someone so that I can then get the thing that I want. And then I'll be living a peaceful life in a harmony and, collaboration.
Exactly, it's beautiful. It has to do with energy and drive. I think that you can squeeze energy out of many different ways of operating, and one thing that is energizing for sure is kind of like, oh, let's go toe to toe, see who wins. So it is driving because there's a lot of components involved that, the external pressure of failing and how it's going to look. So you're escaping this kind of a possibility, right? And the fact that you're trying to get there first and winning, there's something about that is like in the primate's mind is it's very big drive. Like there's a primal thing there. So, but at the same time, there's something very energizing about an authentic, pleasant, stimulating conversation. Also very energizing.
Yeah.
So you can use that as energy and conjure manifesting new ideas through versus we're going to compete with them and we're going to go head to head. They're both strategies, they both work. The question becomes which one of them is more universal? In other words, which one of them you can run over time without essentially capping itself. And competition, I would argue, eventually, when it gets big enough, because the nature of what competition is, when you get big enough, the competition becomes serious enough, and there's no more connection because you're like fractured into these two, and it becomes all-out war, right? So from healthy competition, it will always grow because everything that grows becomes a more pronounced version of itself. So if the attitudes involved inside of people that have to do with all these emotions that are more of the negative flavor, they would grow too. And that's what happens. And if you want to evolve into infinity, into the galaxies and beyond, competition is simply the wrong strategy. It's less universal, I would claim.
Yeah.
Collaboration is this thing that is unifying. So the thing that would grow with it is the unification feeling, and all the vectors are pointing towards one another, as well as towards our common goal, versus against one another, as well as towards some kind of a goal that we think is not common, but So I think that's a much more universal strategy that is just as energizing, if not more energizing. And then it's true that if you grow up in an environment that encourages a lot of competition, you might need some reframing to get energy from a collaborative process, because it might be that you have a judgment of it. So like when you see people smiling and laughing while they're working on something, you might have an idea that, okay, that like you have like a repulsion for this, so you won't be able to enter that picture. So you might need to refrain so you can enter and become energized from this kind of interaction. But But ultimately, as humanity, I think there's no question that one of the collaborative one is a lot more universal.
I agree. Wholeness is always going to bring about greater and greater wholeness versus fragmentation is going to lead us into, further away from, that which we ultimately, I think, are all wanting, a natural kind of inclination towards wholeness and harmony and balance. I wanted to talk a little bit about so with the code, with the experiment and the discovery. So I was determined initially, I wanted to try to see this without any substances, and so I got the laser from you. I set it up, and immediately I could see into it. I could see like a flat surface, almost like, let's say, a foot and a half behind the wall. Shiny, all lit up with intricate, pinpricks of light. Kind of like a magic eye, and similar to that sort of experience, except different because I didn't realize this until I was watching one of your lives, and somebody said, "Oh yeah, but magic eye, you need stereo." And so I tried it because I had a magic eye book, pulled it out, covered one eye. Sure enough, you can't see anything if you just have one eye. But with the code or with the laser, one eye you can still see the surface. You still see all the lights. So I've stared at that thing for over an hour for sure, and I
I don't know if I would recommend that, but yeah.
Maybe not all in one sitting, but definitely over the course of a couple days, and didn't really see. I thought I saw maybe some movement back and forth, but then I couldn't really tell if that was my own body moving slightly and making a contrast on the lines from the laser on the wall. So I said, okay, that's probably what that is. And then I finally I worked up the gumption to try it with the molecule, and but my conditions were far less than ideal.
Suboptimal.
Yes, suboptimal indeed. And also, I have a history with the molecule, which wanted me to make sure that I was in a very safe environment, and I really wanted to have somebody with me. And I'll tell you a little bit about what happened and why that is. But nonetheless, so I know you'd said you can see it with a low dose, so I said, okay, fine, I'll try it with a low dose. And so I did that probably 4 or 5 times one day. And I guess I got to the point to where I could see. I don't know if it was the gears that Danny Jones was describing, but I did see like a wheel of light with spokes. And it looked like it was lit up from inside and it was spinning. And so I was like, okay, maybe that's the gears. And that was definitely new. I didn't see that until I had the molecule. And I think it was probably the time when I did get the largest dose.
Something like this?
Yes, but it was it was like I couldn't see those lines because it was like lit up from within, so it just looked like a wheel of light with spokes, without those intricacies. So, okay, so that's what I saw, and then I did, and that was probably about 3 weeks ago, I think. Yeah, it was on my birthday actually, May 10th, and then. I had a chance to try again yesterday, but again low dose, and still didn't see any of the code. I'm gonna obviously continue, but I obviously also need to have the right conditions and container, because and maybe we could talk a little bit about how important that is. But I'll share briefly the one whopper of an experience. I've had two breakthrough experiences with DMT. I've seen patterns and all sorts of mandalas and things like that. And probably had maybe a dozen or 20 so experiences with the molecule. But the 2 breakthroughs was the first time that I had it, and I went to this Badlands sort of thing, and there were these titans that were walking, and one of them had this like dog-like creature, and the dog-like creature sniffed me out and alerted his owner, which was the titan, and the titan was probably, I don't know, 500 feet tall, and he just kind of bent all the way over until it was eye level and just looked at me and was like, "What do you want?" And I was like, I was shocked. I had plenty of experience with psychedelics, but never went into another dimension. And so I had a little communication with the being. He said, "What do you want?" I said, "I don't know. I'm here, but maybe you could help me with this. I have like a knot here in my gut." And he had this like like a metal, seemed like electrical probe that went in. He went like a proboscis or something. It went in to me, and it did something like R2D2 ish, and then pulled it out, and I felt this release of like some dark energy
Wow.
in my solar
Similar to what
plexus.
Zoltan is talking about with the parasite that was pulled out of his body.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was thinking about that, and hey, thank you for that. But that was pretty much it. And then I wrote a song about it.
that's amazing. I want
And
to hear about it.
yeah, definitely, I'll send it to you.
Please.
And then so a number of years went by, and I sort of my lifestyle had degraded a good bit, right? So you
After
know,
that,
after that, that was like the cusp, but it was already starting to degrade. Like I said, I had been drinking a lot because I wanted to stop the energy, which was perturbing the shit out of me. And so and then I was partying a lot. I got into the Burning Man scene, so I was doing a lot of festivals and all this kind of stuff. Anyways, so I was at a particular festival, and I had been, yeah, again, my lifestyle had degraded to the point to where at this point I was doing cocaine every day for like 3 months straight. I was drinking heavily every day, and various other things. But I was at this festival, and so I was on a number of chemicals already, including cocaine, alcohol, MDMA, and LSD. I had been up. It was Sunday, so the festival started Thursday. So I had been partying for like 3 or 4 days straight. And then my friend told me that there was these people that had this trailer, and they were offering DMT, and I knew people who wanted some, so I went down there to see if I could procure some. Well, the guy was like, "Well, I don't really want to give it to you, but you can try some." And I was like, "Well, I wasn't really planning on trying some, but I guess I could take a little hit." It was more like I was being polite, you know. But I was out of my gourd a little bit, and I was like, I can't really see straight right now, so you put it on. And he put on a mound, is what it looked like to me. But again, I was like, I just want a little bit, and maybe my eyes are distorting this. I don't know. I trust this guy. He seems like trustworthy, right? So he gives me the pipe and a torch, which I had never done this before. But I thought to myself, well, I'll just take a little hit, you know. So I hit it, and instantly I got all of it,
whoa.
like in a moment. And there was no taking a little hit. It all was vaporized and instant. I mean, as soon as I hit, I went, oh my God. And just giant plume of smoke.
What a beautiful moment.
And I'm like, oh fuck, I need to lay down. And I'm sitting on this couch, and I'm like, shit. I'm like looking for that pillow, but I get to about here and I'm already gone. I mean, there's these flower beings that are appearing to me and talking to me. And I was in. I don't remember ever putting my head down. And so what happened is, so they were talking to me, now it's like this, then it's like this, and it's like, I don't remember, they were showing me something, and then I was in the space.
Yeah.
And in the space, and I saw there was like an escalator of light, and all these people were on the escalator. They're all going up, and now I'm on the escalator. We're all going up. We're getting ready to have this amazing experience, whatever that is. And then, the buzzer that goes off at the end of the basketball game?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hear that, and then I fall off the escalator. And then all these beings start running around, and they're panicking. And I can feel like something's wrong, But they're all like freaking out, and they're like, what's going on? What happened? Oh, no, it's not supposed to happen. Oh, yeah, it does happen sometimes. So anyways, they're like, oh, yeah, no, I know it's not supposed to happen, but it does happen every once in a while. And it happened to him, and yeah, he's dead. And I'm like, they're just talking about me like I can't even hear them. But I'm right here, guys, And so they convinced me, and who knows what really happened, but they convinced me that I had died. I said, yeah, not supposed to happen, but sometimes it does happen, and it happened to you, and that's just what it is. They were very matter of fact about it.
Yeah, very matter of fact, exactly.
And I was like, oh shit. And then like this, the weight of what they're telling me is hitting me. And I'm like, oh shit. Like I was just at a festival. Like I'm here with my friends, my girlfriend. Like I have family, I have kids, my parents, what are they going to think? You died at a drug festival. This is going to be my legacy. This is fucking terrible. Like, no, I don't like, but then I'm like, oh, shit. And they're like, and they're kind of like being a little antagonistic now. There were these other beings that were like they were like up on they were like raised up, but they were all kind of connected, but they were all individual connected. And they were telling me like, quit your fucking whining, man. You did this to yourself. Like it just is what it is. We're not trying to hear you complain about it. And I'm like, well, fuck. All right. That's kind of heartless, but all right, sure. I'm like, so what happens to me now? Do I just like become one of you guys? And then they all start laughing. They're all like, ah, one of us? One of us? You could never be one of us. And I'm just like, oh, Jesus. Like, these are pretty harsh, man. Like, so I'm like, okay, well, then what happens to me now? What happens to me? They're like, oh, what happens to you? You are going in there. And they point to like in the corner, there's like this abyss. And I see and I feel it's slowly pulling everything, including myself, into it. You know? And it's like this agony of like, here's your life slipping away. Here you are, and fucking that's all going. And I'm just like, the more grief than I ever could even imagine experiencing in this moment. And finally I said, well, fuck it. I mean, if this is what's happening, like, let's fucking go. Like, I'm not going to sit here and just drag this out forever. So I start trying to flop myself into the hole. And so I'm like flipping my body over, and I get up to the edge of the hole, and I'm like, I roll myself into it, and as I do, I open my eyes. And the guy is standing over me, and he goes, you okay, buddy? You okay? And I just looked up and I go, I'm not dead.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, I know the ones that are like, has that like crazy weight on them. Yeah. So yeah, I can totally understand that you would be very careful with the molecule. And I would also say that I do say this quite a bit now. It's not for everyone. So I know you really want to see it, but what you have to do, and this is something that they now explicitly said again and again, and the last time we were shooting every single day, we had, I think, 3 different people, completely unprompted by one another, say the same thing. They said that you need to listen to us. So every time somebody enters the space, emphasize that they want to explain. So you have to pay attention to what they're saying. And it might be that they're saying this is not for you or not for you right now. Mm-hmm. But you got to listen to that. You can't just insist on what you want. So that humility coupled with like attention and understanding is absolutely paramount. So when you enter into space, even if it's a small dose, stay with it for a second. Don't rush into it. Just sit with it and see what it actually is telling you. Some kind of a, like, you know, it will be clear, right? They're saying, fuck yeah, or not so much, or it's your choice, whatever you want. But you got to listen to what they're saying. And specifically with the troubleshooting of seeing the code, did you see my short troubleshooting video?
Yes.
Yeah, people say it's kind of helpful. And one of the biggest tips there is that don't push. Just kind of like look at it. And one thing I will emphasize, don't look at the surface. As long as you make sure that you look inside, just like you said, you did see the opening. Just zoom in as if you're zooming in through a microscope into one of these dots. Like, see if you see that rotation slowly resolve. By the way, I visited Danny since, and he's now fully seen the code. He's he was up until the conversation with Hamilton. He was still saying gears. Yeah. But he's now seen it. So, I don't know if he's going to be talking about it on the podcast, but he definitely seen it, recorded him. He's okay with us using the material for the movie. Awesome. So eventually it just kind of clicks. And he's like, I don't see even the gears. Like, I just see I see it as clear as day. You can just see it. It just all of a sudden pops into your awareness. Again, no idea why that is, but it will happen. Like, there's no way around it. You just have to kind of allow for it and don't make up stories. People immediately jump. It doesn't sound like you would, but people jump to stories immediately. And what's funny is that the more spiritual they are, the faster they fall into a story. They're like, they don't see it for like 5 minutes, and they're like, they're telling me that they're preventing me from seeing it. I'm like, just stay with it for 5 more minutes. And then they're like, oh, okay. it's like there's immediately like a defense mechanism, so don't make up a story, but listen. Obviously, it's just that you can kind of tell if this is just like your idea or if they're like telling you, because when they're telling you, it's very clear. There's no ambiguity about it. If there's ambiguity about it, it's usually your own inner space kind of making shit up.
Okay.
Yeah.
I should mention too that since I had that Whopper, which has been, I guess it's been about 10 years now. I've made massive changes to my lifestyle, and I was able to quit drinking and quit the cocaine and all that kind of stuff, and for certain the daily use of any of that stuff, which was severely debilitating my health and things like that too. So while I recognized that, okay, that experience was necessary, maybe that was the trip I needed, not the one that I wanted. Yeah. But then only recently, and probably, was very profound, that I actually started to have gratitude for that experience. Not just like, oh, that's what I needed, and yeah, it helped me get, but really like actually being actively thankful for that, for those beings, for giving me that experience so that I could, because yeah, it was a major mind fuck. In fact, for quite a while, I wrestled with the idea that, did I die? Did I actually jump timelines? And then, and I had this like guilt and regret for the people in the other timeline who were suffering because of that choice that I made and all that kind of stuff. And it was like, ugh. Yeah. So
You do that.
then I started realizing, well, if that is the case, there's nothing I can do for them. And here, I'm here now. So I have to live this life.
Yeah.
But yeah, my respect for all these substances, was born on that day.
Oh yeah, it can take you further than you ever realized, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
In a more,
So
yeah.
when I smoked 5-MeO DMT, which was the first time was a couple years ago, and I was absolutely terrified. I mean, probably the most scared I've ever been going into that experience. But I did 5 sessions with it, and I had great, two full
Divine.
releases.
It's divine, yeah.
Yeah. One thing, because you were talking with
You
Zoltan
can
about
see it
this.
inside of Neo, by the way.
What's that?
You
You
can
can
see
see it, yes. Oh, any tryptamine, isn't it?
It seems,
Seems like it.
yeah. And it's weird because 5-MeO is very different
Very.
in the way that it presents itself, and yet the code is the code. In fact, you see it even clearer.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
because I do have some of the, I think it's toad venom, actually, also.
So I've never done the one from the toad. I've done only the jaguar, the synthetic one.
Me too. But I got a pen, and it's the liquid is brown. So I'm like, I think it's actually the venom. And the guy I got it from said, I think that's the venom.
Oh, yeah, well, you
I
told
haven't
me.
experimented with that one yet.
Yeah, I don't.
Again, if the conditions aren't right for DMT, then they're definitely not right for 5-MeO
Sure,
DMT.
yeah, and there's like if you do the prep, I think especially with 5-MeO, the divine nature of it, I think if you do the prep, you should be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And then after you do your experience, only then you can kind of. I saw the code for 5 days straight after.
Ah, yeah, I heard you say that.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
wild.
It is wild. Yeah. That's that. If you ever do mushrooms, you can see the code if you do enough mushrooms.
Yeah, I have some of those as well too, and I know, I feel more comfortable. Obviously, I have more experience, even though you can certainly go places on the mushrooms as well. But there's more of a sense of being grounded.
But it's just more of a commitment. It's like a whole day.
That's the thing too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's that's the only downside of it. It's like it's a whole day, and it's not just a whole day. It's also the next day.
Mm-hmm.
You have to kind of give yourself time. That's why it's a lot harder to investigate on that. I don't know if it works on ketamine. That might be an interesting one to explore. But
That
it
is, I was curious about that actually. Huh. Well, we can report back. Now, I heard you say somewhere that do it during the day, not at night. What's the reason for that?
A few reasons. One of them is that your brain is more energized, and so you can hold your own space better. When you get tired and wonky, it's easier for other things to creep in. Plus, the fact that at night other energies are out to play. So there's nothing wrong with them. It's just that if you're not, if I'm giving a blanket advice for whomever, it's much safer to say that even if you're not experienced, and you don't know how to handle certain presentations, because they're not, again, the darker energies, they're not necessarily evil in the sense that we think of them, but they have a different function that can be disturbing to some people. So it's much better to play during the day where there's less things that might disturb you, and you're more energized and you're not exhausted, because it is tiring for the brain for sure.
Sure. It's kind of like, I guess, watching a scary movie during the day.
Yeah.
Doesn't have the same punch.
Well, it doesn't have to be scary in the sense that
No, but
there's a different possibility
on
there.
one.
Yeah, but it is also I think the thing with the energy is it plays a major role. Yeah, if you don't have enough energy, it's kind of hard. It's like you're already kind of like falling asleep. It's not a good state to start from.
Does anything take away from it? Like, would smoking cannabis enhance it
Yeah,
or take
definitely
away
would.
from it?
No, I definitely do not, especially not cannabis. Cannabis does not mix well with DMT. It glazes it. It creates like almost like a veil. If you want to combat any of the nervousness, one bump of ketamine is actually perfect. Not too
Okay.
much because you might go into loops, but if you do just a tiny bit, it removes the edge. It
Huh.
removes the yeah.
Interesting. I've heard about people doing that, doing a little MDMA before doing like 5-MeO.
If it's smokable, I guess you can. Yeah, that can be helpful as well. If it doesn't influence you negatively, because for a lot of people, the downside of the MDMA is that there's like a drop
Yeah.
after, and if you're experiencing
Well, it
that, then
also plays with your vision too, which,
that's true. But again, it depends on the amount. If it's smokable, I think maybe yes. If you have to take it as a powder, I don't know if I would vote for it. The thing with ketamine is that it's gone within less than 40 minutes.
yeah.
And it doesn't really leave a trace like cocaine does, let's say. So ketamine is a lot more favorable in that way. And again, not to abuse it. Like we're talking about like a tiny bump, just until the edge is gone, like that nervousness that happens in the beginning of before you smoke.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
great to know.
Yeah. Being comfortable in your body is a very important component here. If you're
Yes.
sitting the whole time and you're kind of struggling with it, just because you're like, oh, like that's not a way to explore anything. Yeah.
Does seeing the code depend on any kind of visual impairments? Would that affect it?
It's hard for me to say. Some people say that they have to have their glasses to see it if they have glasses, and
Okay.
other people say they see it better without the glasses. I don't know what to say. I think it has to do with exactly your way of focusing attention. It has to do with convergence. So the same thing that you do when you're looking through the window instead of looking at the surface of a window. So it has to do with projecting convergence to different distances. If you're looking through the window, you're not just looking through the window, you're finding a distance through the window. So if you have a bunch of Waldos outside and you need to find one particular one, right? Then you can focus here or you can focus there, and that's different. You refocus, even though you're going into infinity, into the z-axis, there's still a distance that you can pick, right? So I think it has to do with that. Now, the code is the whole thing. It's not in a special place, but it's the whole thing. But you just have to stay on one region and just focus there. And my guess is what sometimes is happening is that people just get scattered without realizing it because they're looking into infinite amount of information, so they're just jumping around all the time, so they never focus on any particular region. But if you focus on one spot and just stay there, just stay on it, don't move, and allow it to resolve. That's the best phrasing I can give it. Allow it to resolve. Just stay with it.
Okay. That
yeah.
makes sense then, because the last time I tried, it seemed like those could be characters, but it just not quite snapping into focus.
So allow yourself to investigate this. Don't worry right now about confirmational bias, because the thing is automatically like, well, if I'm thinking it's characters, then even if I'm going to see the characters, I'm not going to be impressed because I thought there might be characters. So don't worry about that part. Just lean into it. I promise that when it fully resolves, this idea that you might have about, well, I thought about characters, therefore it's characters, will go away. Because it's so HD that it's not like one of these things that were implied. In fact, one way to test for this, if people are still worried about this idea of like, priming themselves, it's unresolvable, which means that if it was implied, you could technically change it to something else later, right? If you would insist on it, you can't. So so like the second it lands on what it is, think of giraffes, think of whatever,
Right.
won't change to that. It stay what it is. So
Yeah.
that's your sign.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, brother, this has been awesome, man. I really appreciate you hanging out and discussing these things. And I definitely would love to reconnect after some time, maybe when I've had ability to establish proper conditions, and I can report some of my findings.
This would be a blast. And this interview was a blast, man. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, you're more than welcome, man. If anyone wants to find you, Dan Go Thoughts, I know on YouTube, and of course I'll put all the links in the
Thank you.
description and everything.
Yeah, Code of Reality and then Go Thoughts are the two main things.
Codeofreality.com, yes.
Yep.
All right, my man.
Brother, you're an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Let's stay in touch, brother.
Absolutely.
All right, much love.
You too. Have a wonderful day.
I am Allah, I am Yahweh Ababa. No one may test the Father. I am the health, rustling of the